Yeah, that's what I said. I don't know, man. Hey, can I get another drink, please? Thanks. So anyways,
Shade agent credentials authenticated.
Shit. Hey, I gotta go. For me, few games invoke such a feeling of wonder as The Division. Obviously, the game by no means is mysterious. However, when I watch the original gameplay trailer from 2013, I feel something akin to nostalgia. I remember sitting around my computer with my friends watching the E3 announcement showcase and getting excited over all the new games and the insane graphics of the upcoming generation. When The Division came on screen, we were enthralled. The level of detail, the idea of this pseudo MMO where you could explore with friends on a console, it was all awesome. At the time, my friends had consoles and I was the only one that had really stepped into PC gaming, and that was specifically for MMOs. So having an MMO I could play with my friends sounded cool. Obviously, the game would have problems that wouldn't be known to us for 3 more years upon its release. However, if I told you I was obsessed with this game until it came out, that would be a complete understatement. I was watching trailers constantly, finding every tiny dev interview I could from even the smallest creators just to get all the information I could find. Hell, I was even watching speculation videos picking apart the tiniest of blurred images in the backgrounds to figure out what a potential skill was, or speculating on the layout of an area and what more there could be through a doorway. I'm sure I annoyed my friends constantly for 3 years straight because I would bring them any news I dug up, and all I wanted to do was talk about the game. Though, to my dismay, by the 300th time of bringing it up, I would just be met with a disinterested, "That's cool, man." While The Division isn't technically lost, it's safe to say that even when it was actively played, it wasn't all that popular. With The Division 2 having been out for 5 years now, and The Division 3 confirmed to be on the way, topped with Ubisoft closing down some of their other online games recently, I unfortunately feel like The Division isn't long for this world. Development of The Division started back in early 2013 by Massive Entertainment, though they had developed the IP and tech for a few years before that. The game, being Ubisoft's answer to Destiny, was originally meant to take a similar role and be developed exclusively for the PS4 and Xbox One. However, due to player outcry, Ubisoft decided to also develop a PC version. Ubisoft officially unveiled The Division during E3 2013 with a gameplay trailer that, while including some terribly cringy acting, astounded everyone. I mean, look at this. You can close doors! The graphics were leagues above anything else shown during the event, with exception to, let me check my notes. Watch Dogs. Hey, I know what you're thinking. Just hold on. Don't get ahead of me. The game was originally announced to be launching sometime in 2014, though was delayed to 2015. 2014 did, however, bring with it another gameplay trailer showing the same group of agents from the original, this time taking over the base of operations. This trailer was once again overall received well, though the acting of the characters was still quite questionable. Eventually, 2015 would come, and with it, another delay and another trailer. This time showcasing the Dark Zone, the game's PvPvE extraction zone. This trailer was once again overall received well, however, this time players did start to notice that the graphics were seemingly hugely downgraded from the initial 2 trailers. Like, a decent bit. This wasn't exclusive to The Division though, as just the year before, in 2014, Watch Dogs had also released looking absolutely nothing like its initial 2013 trailer either. While it wasn't surprising that The Division was also graphically downgraded, it was no less of a bummer. Still, the hype was building, and this would be the last gameplay trailer release before the launch. The new release date was unveiled as March 8th, 2016. I remember after seeing this trailer, my hype was at an all-time high, and waiting those 9 months between E3 and release was borderline painful. By this time, I had already spent 2 years thinking about this game and constantly trying to find dev interviews and looking for any and all information I could about it. Finally, as we entered into 2016, it was announced that The Division would have a closed beta starting on the 28th of January and ending on the 31st, with another, this time open beta, running from the 19th of February to the 21st of that same month, with Xbox players getting 1 day early access on the 18th. My friends and I all got in on both beta tests, and my hype was all over the place. While it wasn't exactly the original vision we were shown back in 2013, I remember still having an immense amount of fun. My search for information didn't even stop when I could finally play it. I was watching gameplay from the beta non-stop during a press event a couple days prior to closed beta, and was able to tell my friends what the controls were when they were figuring everything out while my game was still downloading. During the beta, I was even taking notes and making spreadsheets of what gear was dropping from where so that when release came, provided it was unchanged, I could farm out the best gear pieces as soon as possible. I hardcore raided in WoW prior to this, and somehow this was the first game I got this diehard over. Makes sense now that I'd later dabble a bit in EVE. The final beta closed on the 21st of February, and the 16 days between the end of the beta and release were agonizing for me. I distinctly remember trying to sleep as much as possible to speed the time up. If I could have frozen myself to be thawed on release, I definitely would have. Eventually, my wait would be over, and it was finally time to sink my life into the game. Upon release, The Division's issues would start to arise. This game was no exception to the server issues that frequently impact live service games of this nature. If anyone else remembers the dreaded Delta error, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The actual early game was mostly fine, though some issues, even early on, were glaring. The enemies were extremely spongy, and actually killing them would take way too long. The issue was exacerbated by the fact that the enemies would take advantage of their sponginess and just casually walk right up to players and shoot them in the face. I know, even in my friend group, we were getting extremely frustrated with it. More issues arose during the late and endgame stages. The loot system was extremely unrewarding, with each upgrade feeling like there was no impact on your character. On top of that, getting the gear that you wanted was slow. In The Division, gear is split up between 3 different archetypes: firearms, stamina, and skill power. These are randomly allocated per piece of gear. There are also talents and attributes. These are all random. One of the major complaints was that you could get an all firearms piece with attributes that were all skill power, and a talent that benefited neither playstyle. This is an issue that's still prevalent today. However, at the time, getting good gear drops was even more minuscule than it is today, and the chances that you would get a utterly trash piece of loot were much higher. The endgame itself was not there. I mean, it was, but at launch your 2 options were to run the same missions you did to level up at a higher difficulty, or go into the Dark Zone. The Dark Zone had issues, however, especially on PC. As it was the game's PvPvE area, you not only had to deal with enemy AI, but also other players who, due to almost all gameplay mechanics being client-side, were able to use cheat engines to hack the game and dominate players in the Dark Zone. If you did this, I hate you and hope you burn in hell. Due to a plethora of issues like these, the player base started waning fairly shortly after release. Post-release, the devs at Massive were doing their best to right the ship. Over the following months, they were releasing patches to fix gear drops and fighting an uphill battle against cheaters in the Dark Zone. March 22nd, 14 days after release, there was a patch that fixed some bugs, but the most notable change was that named enemies, bosses, would now drop better loot in challenge mode than it would on hard mode. Something so obvious it should have been the design choice from the beginning was now getting a patch to implement it 2 weeks after launch, if that's any indication of how much needed fixing. The game's first incursion, Falcon Lost, would soon release on the 12th of April, being the Division's answer to Destiny's raids and to help add content for the endgame. Unfortunately, by this time, most players had, moved on. I was the only one left in my friend group playing by the time the first major content patch had rolled out, and to top it off, it was severely overtuned, making clearing the incursion with a random group of players and matchmaking nearly impossible early on, until a wave of tuning passes eventually made their way to the pseudo-raid sometime later. May brought gear sets, adding in farmable 4-piece set bonuses that would help set you into a playstyle. There were also some additional miscellaneous changes, like being able to cut the rope during extraction in the Dark Zone and adding in more named weapons to the game. Finally, in June, the first paid expansion released for both PC and Xbox, with PS4 players receiving the update in August. Why they did this weird time exclusivity contract, I don't know, but it kinda used to be more common in the early 2010s, then tapered off. Anyways, this update introduced the Underground game mode, a procedurally generated dungeon system allowing players to run through short-form encounters with or without modifiers to earn loot drops. Included in these dungeons was the chance to encounter a new enemy type called the Hunters, rogue Division agents that were out to kill other agents. These enemies had multiple loot drops upon death and were more challenging than your normal enemy. The second paid expansion, Survival, was released in November, once again for PC and Xbox, with PS4 receiving it in December. This expansion was, as you could imagine, a survival-based game mode. Taking place in the Dark Zone during a blizzard, the game mode had a PvPvE focus, with players having to manage hunger, cold, and thirst alongside attempting to find ammo and weapons to defend themselves against other players and enemy AI. This was kind of an early battle royale in a way. It came out a whole 4 months before PUBG and 10 months before Fortnite would introduce their battle royale. This expansion was well received, though it didn't make big enough waves to really bring players back. The final paid expansion, titled Last Stand, arrived in February of 2017, releasing simultaneously across all platforms. Last Stand was a PvP capture the flag style game mode with 2 teams of 16 players fighting against each other to control 3 different points spread across a small map, similar to Domination in Call of Duty. The twist being that small groups of enemies would roam around the map and would drop shade tech on death. Players could use this shade tech to purchase turrets or point boosts for their team. This update, much like the other 2, was relatively small, really only adding in 1 contained experience in the form of a game mode and an incursion, as well as some small quality of life changes. With the release of Last Stand, players were waiting to hear more information on what was coming next. I remember being somewhat disappointed as the last expansion of the 3 was exclusively PvP focused, something I personally don't find as enjoyable. So I was waiting anxiously for more information on what was coming next, and unfortunately when we would finally get the information that we wanted about the year 2 of content for the Division, it was disappointing. During the year 2 celebration livestream, the devs announced that basically there would be no more major updates in terms of level cap, or a traditional expansion. This was a huge bummer for myself and many others in the player base, as initially we were promised years of content updates for this game. Despite this, however, somewhere around the time of global events releasing, the devs started teasing a big update that was in the works. After months of teases and discussion around the update, it would finally come in December of 2017, a whole 9 months after releasing Last Stand, simply titled Resistance. This update was huge, adding in 3 new zones inside the Dark Zone, a new zone in the regular overworld, a new Horde mode, 8 new classified gear sets, 4 exotics, and a slew of quality of life changes. This update was fantastic, and did wonders for the health of the game. A lot of my friends even came back around this time, and I remember noticing the boost in player count as there were no longer wait times to find lobbies for survival or the new Resistance Horde mode. However, despite this seeming like a turning point, it actually ended up being the final major content patch for The Division, as just 4 months later in March of 2018, Ubisoft would announce its sequel, The Division 2, effectively marking the end for the first game. And unfortunately, that's pretty much where the history ends. It received a couple balance patches leading up to release of The Division 2 in March of 2019, but aside from that, it sat mostly stagnant. It was in a good place, sure, but with no new content on the horizon, the player base quickly lost interest and player count dropped back to the normal numbers, if not slightly higher than before, as the game had become much more enjoyable by this time. Since The Division 2's release, the first game has sat mostly untouched aside from a couple stability and bug fixes from time to time, mostly just to keep the game working. We can't see the true player count, but if SteamDB is anything to go by, well, there's actually a surprising number of players active in the game. Peak on Steam alone is around 1,000 concurrent in 24 hours, which is honestly quite unexpected. So, what happened? Well, The Division never fully recovered from its initial troubles at launch. Their target market was gamers that enjoyed loot shooters, and launching a game that had nearly no endgame content that is also competing with Destiny, arguably the king of loot shooters, well, most players just went back to Destiny. To top it off, a lot of the players that stuck around felt burned by the long stretches of time between updates. As we covered earlier, there was a 9-month gap of content from the release of The Last Stand to the release of the Resistance update. A lot of players simply got bored. Another thing to note is that back when the initial trailers for the game were unveiled, players were shown a product that basically didn't actually exist at that time. I know a lot of people swore off playing The Division when it was coming out purely because they felt deceived by Ubisoft. Watch Dogs releasing prior and being a disaster had also contributed to a lot of gamers losing interest in The Division, assuming it would have the same outcome, and to an extent, they were kind of right. It had a lot of issues at launch, and the gameplay for some was uninteresting, the graphics were nothing like what players had expected them to be, and it was becoming a trend for Ubisoft games. All of this added up to a stacked deck against The Division, and it didn't help that the devs were having trouble fixing and communicating issues to players for months. The Division was a very special game for me. It was the first time I really truly got hyped for a game. The first time I got really disappointed in a game, and despite all its issues, it got me fully into PC gaming outside of just playing World of Warcraft. As I said earlier in the video, I ended up being the only one left in my friend group still playing the game, and I continued to play it until The Division 2 came out. The hype and love I had for the game made me want to experience it with the best performance and visuals. So, I ended up building my first high-end PC to fully experience its glory. I made the swap to PC around the same time the survival game mode came out, and really, if it weren't for The Division, I may still be playing on console. Regardless of The Division's legacy, it holds a special place in my heart, and with the announcement of massive starting development on The Division 3, I can only hope that they take the knowledge they've obtained from the first 2 entries and fully make the game we've wanted since the first E3 2013 trailer.